Mr. Kennedy.
Chair, our first witness today is Mrs. Sarah Ossolinsky.
Okay, if you'd just like to stand up, please. Take the Bible and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Please sit down.
My name's Ruth Kennedy and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Do you have a copy of your witness statement there?
I do.
I think it should be dated the 3rd of February 2022.
Yes.
And if you turn to the last page, which I think is page 17,
Yes,
is that your signature?
it is.
Have you read this statement through recently?
I have.
And is it true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
I'm going to start by asking a couple of introductory questions about you. How old are you now?
65.
And how long have you been married?
44 years.
How many children do you have?
3.
Could you describe for the chair what types of jobs you did before working for the post office?
Yes. When I left school, I joined the Midland Bank. I worked there until I had my first child. I didn't go straight back. I worked in a nursery school and in Asda supermarket, and then I went back to the bank, and I stayed there till I was 40, and then we bought the post office and the retail newsagent.
What types of things were you doing in the bank?
Oh, all sorts. Working on the counter, doing the remittances, sorting out standing orders, direct debits, looking after the computer, all sorts of things.
Why did you decide to leave banking?
Because it changed. It changed from what I felt was a service industry, which was customer-led, to being a sales industry where we were all given quotas about how many mortgages we should try to sell, how many insurance policies we should try to sell, and it was not something I enjoyed anymore.
So why did you decide to buy a post office?
Because that went back to the customer-led type of work that I enjoyed. I enjoyed the interaction between customers, I enjoyed listening to them, I enjoyed helping with problems because they see you as someone they can come to with their problems. And it was just a different, it's a whole change of life when you buy a post office and a newsagent. You become part of the community. It's like having a huge extended family.
I think you say in your statement you became sub-postmistress of Gare
Park.
Gare Park.
Should be Gair.
Yeah, I was going to jump in then.
Yes, but they all call it Gair in Newport.
Yeah, I'm sure they do, yeah.
And you said that was in Newport.
Yes,
And was that in around October 1996?
it was.
How did you finance that purchase?
We sold our house in Cardiff. We were paying $89,950, and we took out a business loan for $43,000 and paid the balance from the proceeds of the house. We also had to have a business overdraft of £7,500 to pay for stock in the shop.
What other businesses did you run from the same premises?
It was a retail newsagent with a little store, greetings cards, lots of magazines and basics, kitchen towel, toilet roll, tins, bottles of bleach, bits and pieces, and lots of stationery.
How many assistants did you have?
Well, all 3 daughters worked for us part-time when we first moved in, when they were in college and high school. And we had one early morning assistant in the shop and 1 assistant in the post office, and myself and my husband both worked full-time.
And how did you feel about working for the post office when you took over?
When I first started, good. It just seemed like a perfect fit. But I soon learned that they don't actually care about their sub-postmasters. They don't give you the care that an employer would normally give an employee because they don't see you as employees. You're just, what do they call us, agents. So we're on our own, really. Yes, there was a helpline, but in the early days, I have to say, there was a line manager, but they kind of got phased out and you were left on your own for the majority of the time.
When was Horizon introduced in your branch?
I think it was late 1999 going into 2000. I can't be more specific, I'm sorry.
What training did you receive at that time?
A day and a half in a hotel somewhere, and the rest of I think my eldest daughter and my husband got a day. I had the extra half day to go through the balancing procedure. And then after that, we had someone in the office with us to watch that we were doing it properly.
What did the trainers tell you was the right way to balance?
They specifically said to balance to nil. So you take a snapshot, and if you're short or over, you deal with it, and then you actually balance to nil and roll over.
How did you find using Horizon?
Well, it seemed really easy to start off with. We still had paper, we still had dockets, we still had checks, and it was fairly easy to balance. But once the pension books were phased out, it became a lot more difficult. You couldn't check back on anything because there was nothing to check back. Everything was on the computer. And we noticed that we were getting regular shortages from that time.
And what about Horizon Online? Was that introduced into your branch?
That was the training that we were having at the time of my suspension. We had someone in to do the training during the day, and at the end of the day, she said, "Can I do a cash check?"
How quickly did you notice shortfalls or discrepancies appearing on the system?
Oh. I can't be completely specific because I can't remember the date that the pension books were phased out, but it was around that time. It was when the post office card account was introduced and we weren't able to check anything back.
You mentioned the helpline a moment ago. How did you find using that?
Sometimes helpful, but more often than not, they weren't able to help. I didn't ring them that much because I felt quite alone in the office. My husband had had a massive heart attack, and I was trying to not explain to him about the problems we were having in the post office. Excuse me. But the helpline either couldn't help and just said, pay the money in, or they'd take you through what sounded like a script, and your problem would double in front of you. So I didn't call them very often. I called them if there was something that one of us had done by mistake and I needed to reverse it for them to give me the authorization. But other than that, I didn't bother.
What would you do when you noticed a shortfall or a discrepancy?
Pay it back.
How often would you put money into the post office?
Most weeks.
Can you give us an idea of what sums, the range of sums we're talking about?
Anything from 90 to just over £1,000 initially.
And how did you feel about this at the time?
Awful. I dreaded balance day, absolutely dreaded it.
How much altogether do you estimate you paid into the post office?
Oh, I think it's at least 25,000, at least.
You mentioned in your statement that you made a list of the payments that you made.
I did.
Who did you show that list to?
My federation rep.
What did your federation rep say?
It was when we were going into my return to unit interview after I'd been suspended, and I showed her my list, and I'd only been doing it for 2 years. Should have done it for a lot longer. And she looked at it and she said, "Don't mention this in your interview." And I said, "Why not?" Because it shows there's a problem. Because by that time I was suspicious of the system. And she said, "No," she said, "they'll shut you down straight away." So I had to go into the interview and not mention the problems that I was having, even though I was going in because I had a problem. It was very difficult.
You mentioned in your statement an audit, I think in the mid-2000s, which showed a shortfall of £230. Could you tell us a bit about what that audit was like?
That one wasn't too bad because it was a difference that I was used to. They said that some of it was stock. I find that hard to believe because two of us checked the stock. I would check one stock and my assistant would double check what I'd done and vice versa. But it was around the £200 mark that I was used to paying back by that time, so it didn't surprise me. That audit wasn't stressful in any way.
I think you go on to mention an audit in June 2010, and that's after someone came to conduct Horizon Online training, is that right?
That's correct, yes, on the 4th of June.
Could you tell us about what happened on the 4th of June?
Yes, certainly. Young woman came to do this Horizon Online training, and at the end of the day she asked if she could do a cash check. I said, yes, you can, but it'll be short. And she said, why is that? And I said, because I had a difference in March of £1,872.44p, which I wasn't able to resolve, and I wasn't able to repay because I'd been repaying multiple shortages before that, and I'd just run out of funds. My overdraft was at its limit, so I just kept rolling it over. And I had, by that time, got it down to 1,560. And she said, OK, I've got to phone my manager. She phoned the manager spoke to me and said, I'm suspending you for false accounting.
I think at that time you mentioned there might have been an explanation for the shortfall to do with a customer who phoned.
Yes, that was a bit of a red herring. Well, I didn't speak to him. One of the assistants in the shop spoke to him, and he said that he had been overpaid. But I really don't think that he would have been overpaid by nearly £2,000. I just can't imagine that would happen. I can imagine £10 or £20, but we looked everywhere, and I was hoping that the post office would be able to do some sort of investigation into my accounts, from their end, but they never did.
What happened to the branch on the 4th of June?
It was closed.
And so you couldn't go back into the branch.
No.
And I think you then mentioned an audit scheduled for the 7th of June.
The Monday, yes.
Who carried out that audit?
One chap was called Paul. I can't remember the other chap's name. I know they were training officers. And they took 5 hours, had to be present the whole time. And they came up with over £2,000 shortage. I then realised that the two women that had closed the post office didn't secure, we had what's called a combi till in the shop. And I had been in a complete state of distress on Friday when I was suspended, but they didn't check the combi till. And when I went to look, there was £2,000 in there. And then there was another 200 and something, which was the normal shortfall, which I paid in cash. I had already, on Friday the 4th of June, put a cheque in for 1,560 to cover what I knew was going to be short. So I didn't actually owe the post office any money at this time until the shortage of 200 and something, which I paid them in cash.
What did the auditors say to you when you highlighted that there was money in another location?
They told me not to worry about it. They said, I'll watch you go and get it. And I brought it to them and they said, that's great, thank you, Sarah.
And so what did you think would come of that?
Nothing. I thought I had no reason to believe that they suspected me of anything at that time. It was only later. And in the audit, they pointed out that the notes in the combi till were all facing the same way. Now, because of my banking experience, I'm old school. When I count notes, I put them all the same way. I'm the same now in my purse. Everything faces the same way. right way up, facing out. And that's how I'd always done it. But they said because the money in the safe, which we just had delivered, wasn't presented in that way, that somehow there was something wrong with the ones that were.
And you say you find this later. This was the report of the audit, is
Yes.
that right? And how did all of this make you feel?
Small, guilty, weak,
Why did you feel guilty?
because I felt like I'd let everyone down. I felt like somehow I'd got it completely wrong. That maybe the stress of my husband's illness had made me make mistakes. I knew in my heart that that couldn't be so because I wasn't the only one working in the post office. And we were all checking and rechecking all the time, but there was just nothing to find. And I knew logically that I couldn't be making mistakes for around £200 every week. It just doesn't make sense. So I became a hermit for 8 weeks. I didn't go outside the house. And the doctor very kindly signed me onto the sick. I have a condition called fibromyalgia, which is exacerbated by stress. And I was quite poorly for quite a long time, even after I went back into the shop.
You say in your statement you were interviewed by the post office later in June on the 22nd, is that right?
Yes, it's called an RTU.
And who interviewed you?
A chap called Gary Adderley and two others. He had 2 people with him, as far as I know, because it was his first week on the job. Worst experience of my life.
So
Why-
could you tell me what RTU stands for?
Return to unit,
Fine, thank you.
in the hope that post office would allow you to continue with your work.
So this was an interview with the possibility of you going back to work. This wasn't to do with criminal proceedings or anything.
No,
like that.
I was never
No,
prosecuted.
I follow that. Thank you.
Why do you say it was the worst experience of your life?
Because it was obvious from the outset that they had made up their minds of my guilt.
What representation did you have?
I had a federation rep and a trainee federation rep who was both sub-postmasters, and the trainee was actually a former police inspector.
How well supported did you feel by them?
Initially, well, my federation rep was very experienced. She got very high up in the federation eventually, and she seemed quite confident that I would be back in my office. Subsequently, when I went for my appeal hearing, it was just the trainee because the federation rep had gone off to have an operation. And he was good too, but it was, once my contract was terminated, it's just abandoned. They don't ring to say how are you or how are you coping. Nothing. You don't get anything.
What did the post office ask you in the interview?
What I'd done with the money. Why was I false accounting? And I explained that I did the work as they'd instructed me to do, and they told me no, what I was doing was false accounting, and that the correct way to do it was X. And they just badgered and bullied, and I just felt pummeled.
You mentioned your contract being terminated. I think that happened on the 28th of June.
Yes,
Right. What was the reason given for your termination?
false accounting.
And you mentioned you appealed. What was the outcome of that appeal?
Same.
I'm now going to ask you some questions about the impact that all of this has had on you. First, looking at the financial, what happened to your business?
Well, the post office asked if I wanted the post office to stay open, and I said yes because, the community was relying on it. So they installed a relief company called New Rose. They came in and did their own audit and found discrepancies in the audit that the post office had carried out and paid me some money back. And they appointed my assistant as manager. And the first week that she was in charge, she had a £900 shortfall, which she was told she had to pay back. And they paid a nominal rent to us, just under half of what the rent on our lease was. So we struggled on for a while, but because people avoided the post office because I wasn't in there, they thought they were supporting me by not supporting the post office. But of course, if they don't come to the post office, they don't use the retail. So we got to the point where we couldn't afford to keep going. So our lease was actually up by then. So we took the decision to walk away. So we lost any sale proceeds that we would have had for the business and obviously future salary.
And what about your future salary? I mean, what would you estimate you lost in terms of earnings?
Something over 600,000. I was on 51,000 a year at the time, and I was 54, I think. So I had many, many years ahead of me.
And how long did you intend to run the post office?
Oh, forever. I imagine myself as a little old lady, you know, behind the counter. I just enjoyed it. You know, it was just part of our lives by that time.
You also mentioned in your statement a bank overdraft.
Yes.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Yes, started off at 7,500, and by the time we walked away from the business, it was 25,000.
What about your home?
Well, we let it out initially, moved in with our daughter and son-in-law and their 2 children, and then that was just too stressful. So we sold the house and used the proceeds to pay off our debts and some debts that our younger daughter had accrued. And then we were lucky enough to be given a housing association bungalow, which we now live in.
What was the impact of all of this on your reputation within the community?
Our community was nothing but supportive. Nobody, I say nobody. The vast majority of people didn't believe that I had stolen money. I'm quite sure that there were people out there that avoided us and thought we were guilty. But yes, it makes you put your head down. It's an awful feeling, and it stays with you for a long time.
You've also mentioned the impact that this has had on your health. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia the year after my husband had his heart attack. Apparently it can be caused by a shock, and he was only 48 when that happened to him, and it left him quite disabled, and he's had many interventions since, and he's, you know, quite disabled now. And fibromyalgia has multiple symptoms. You have chronic pain, you have depression, you have anxiety, you have burning sensation in your muscles. And the fatigue can be overwhelming. There are days when I can't get out of bed. And when this happened, I just went into free fall with it, and it took me 8 weeks to just get myself together enough to go back into the shop. And the support we received from the community was what kept me going.
How was your sleep affected by the shortfalls and the
I either slept 24 hours in a row or not at all.
What was the impact of this on your family?
They were all, with 3 daughters and 1 grandson at the time, who was 4. Obviously, he was oblivious, and he kept us all going. Our girls were just quite traumatised to see their mother treated in that way. And they still now can't, they're quite angry. And 2 of them suffer with mental health issues, and I'm sure that that was exacerbated by the way that I was treated.
What about the impact on your relationship with your husband?
Well, we separated for a time, but when he had his heart attack, we reconciled because I just couldn't see him like that, and we'd been married for a long time by then anyway, and there was too much love there. But yes, it wasn't easy for quite a while because I wasn't easy to live with.
What would you like from the post office now?
Restitution. I would like a personal apology for everyone. I would like a written personal apology for everyone, because saying, yes, there is a problem with the computer system, when you're forced to do so because the courts have proved it, is not really an admission that you knew there was something wrong and that you had been cruel and vindictive to so many people and ruined so many people's lives. I'm not broken, but there are a lot of us who are broken. And we all need help financially now. Nobody is living the high life. We're all struggling, and we shouldn't be. It's not fair.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to the Chair?
I have a short statement, Chair, if that's okay.
Of course, yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. I can only speak for my own family when I say this whole experience has been a living nightmare. For 12 years, we have watched Post Office and government prevaricate and throw money at preventing us from achieving justice, and I know many of us have suffered for much longer. No one at the top of Post Office has properly apologised or faced prosecution for the lies they have told. They've all received large bonuses when they moved on, whilst we were left to survive on benefits or low-paid jobs. Our characters ruined and confidence crushed. Whilst this inquiry may get us answers to some of our questions, we need help financially now. How long can Post Office hide from the responsibility of paying proper compensation to us all? Thank you.
On that last topic, I think you were one of the claimants in the group litigation.
I was one of the 555.
Yes. And like everyone else who's come before me, who were claimants, you've received some compensation,
Yes.
but it doesn't compare with what you think you properly should get.
No,
That's it in summary, isn't it?
that's the bottom line.
Yeah. All right. Thank you
you
very
so much.
Thank you for coming. Don't rush away.
Oh, right, I'm sorry.
Just for the moment. Let's find out what's happening next.
Chair, our next witness is Mr. John Bowman, who's going to be a remote witness.
Okay, so we'll take a 10-minute break since we've gone through this lady's evidence reasonably swiftly. So we'll take a 10-minute break, and thank you again for coming. Good morning, Mr. Bowman. Can you hear me?
So, yes, thank you.
And can you see me?
I can.
Well, that's very good. I'll now hand you over to these ladies who will take you through your evidence.
Mr. Bowman, I'm just going to hand you over to the usher, Jane.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Bowman. I understand you are swearing on the Bible today?
No, I haven't got a Bible.
Are you affirming? Okay. You're affirming. Okay. If you'd like to repeat after me, please. I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly,
sincerely and
truly,
truly
declare and affirm, sorry, I'll point to the camera,
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bowman, as you know, my name's Ruth Kennedy and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Could you confirm your full name, please?
John Anthony Bowman.
Have you got a copy of your witness statement there?
Yes, I have.
And it should be dated the 7th of February 2022, is that right?
Yes.
And if you look at the last page, which I think should be page 14, is that your signature there?
Yes.
Have you read through this statement recently?
Yes.
And is it true to the best of your knowledge and belief? Sorry, did you say yes?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sorry. I'm going to start by asking a few introductory questions about you. What age are you now?
73.
And how long have you been married?
53 years in 2 weeks' time.
How many children do you have?
I have 3 children, twins. The oldest 2 are twins and a younger daughter. 6 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild.
What types of jobs did you do before you became a sub-postmaster?
I was a senior production manager at Sony UK, which manufactured televisions and computer monitors, and I was a licensee.
Why were you drawn to work for the post office?
We'd been working in the license trade for the previous few years, which we thoroughly loved. It was mixed with people. We're both people. The thing with the pub trade is we were coming up to 50 years of age, then 48, 49. The pub trade is a fantastic trade, but it's long, long hours. People don't see the hours you put in. Although the pub doesn't open until 11, 12 o'clock, from 9 o'clock you're either at the cash and carry or you're cleaning lines or you're working from 9 in the morning till midnight. All weekends, holidays, Christmases, New Year. We were had just had our first grandchildren and we wanted to spend more time with the family, have more time to ourselves, work a 9-to-5 job, weekends and holidays away.
And why specifically the post office of all the 9-to-5 jobs?
We looked at several different types of... We wanted our own business, we wanted to continue our own business, so we looked at several different types. And the post office, first of all, it was the most regular of income. You knew roughly what you were going to be earning, and you would have the shop on top of that. It was the most reputable of businesses that you could think of. If you were going to work in conjunction with somebody, it would be the post office that you would want to work with. And again, it was continuing this idea of working with people, being sociable and interacting.
And you say in your statement you became sub-postmaster of Brinner Post Office, have I said that correctly?
Good pronunciation, well done.
I might have had a little bit of help. And I think you took over that post office in around May 1998, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And who did you plan to give the post office to eventually?
My younger daughter was going to take over the post office eventually. We'd come to an agreement whereby she was saving up, and she was originally going to buy the building, the freehold, and she would take over the post office. We would continue to have the retail side for a while, and after she bought the freehold, when she was in with the post office salary, she would then pay us for the post office element of the business, so she could pay that while she was in the post office earning. So it was a way of it. It was the only way that she could do it financially, to actually do it that way. That she started off just buying the freehold, and then over the next number of years she would pay the post office element of it.
So you were planning for many years in the future at Signs?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember when Horizon was introduced in your branch?
It was beginning of 2002.
What training did you receive on Horizon?
We went for basically, I think it was a week's training. It was either 4 days or a week's training in post office offices in Tremaine Road in Bridgend.
How did you find that training?
It was very basic. It was really all about navigating around the system, showing you where to go from stamps to pensions to navigating, and then explaining you how to upsell if you were doing somebody's foreign currency, how you would try to sell them insurance at the same time. So we spent a lot of time on that. But basically it was navigating around the system, getting used to the system, which was fairly basic, really.
How did you find using Horizon?
The system itself, as we were trained, it's a simple system. It's very easy to navigate around. It's all there in front of you on the screen. Problems arose with transactions that you've done really, which is in a small post office, things like foreign currency and insurance, then you'd have to refer to the manual that was provided, which wasn't very user-friendly. So the basics, stamps, pensions, gyros, were very simple and very easy to navigate.
How soon after you took over did you start to notice shortfalls and discrepancies?
Well, nothing when we took over. It was a paper-based. It was when the Horizon system
Oh,
was
sorry, yes, quite right.
It was more or less straight away. It was from week one, we were getting small discrepancies.
And what would you do when you noticed those discrepancies?
We made them good as they came up. They were usually from around 100 to 250, 300 pound. It was a new system. You expected there were going to be problems to begin with.
Would
So
you? Sorry. No, sorry. Finish what you were going to say.
No, I was just saying you were told it was your responsibility to make good the losses, and you just made good the losses as they came along.
Did you use the helpline?
We did use the helpline to begin with. We found them understanding, not very helpful, not very efficient. They seemed to be just following an algorithm. Have you done this? Have you tried this? Have you done that? Have you done another balance? And it didn't explain anything to you. It didn't help you. It was just basically saying, the things that you've already done, they were querying, have you done this? Have you done that? And then at the end, we'll try another balance that might sort it out. It didn't. Usually it made it worse.
You mentioned in your statement that your area manager visited you a couple of months after Horizon was introduced. Is that right?
Yes, as I say, again, I don't want to tar all the area managers with the same brush. I mean, when we first moved into the area, to the post office, we had a phenomenal area manager, a young lady that would visit us every 4 or 5 weeks, pop in, have a cup of tea, ask us how things were going, pass on tidbits that she picked up in other offices as to how to increase sales and salary. She was fantastic. Once Horizon was introduced, we never seen her again, and then we had the problems, and the next area manager came out as a new manager we'd never met before. He wasn't sociable at all. He was very businesslike. Came in, we explained the problems to him that we were having. Wasn't really interested. He was, it's a new system. You're obviously making mistakes. Things will clear up. If there is any problems from our end, it'll soon be picked up and it'll be put right. Just make sure that you keep putting it right. Make sure that you balance each week, each month, and roll over. Otherwise, you won't be able to open the post office. And if you don't make good, then the post office may take some sort of action against you. There'll be consequences if you didn't. But it wasn't in a nasty way. It was in a sort of business-like way that he came across.
How did that make you feel, though, when he said that to you?
It made me feel inadequate in some way. I mean, my background was, I had a lot of experience in data input. I had a great deal of knowledge of computer manufacture, computer monitor manufacturers and TVs. So I thought I knew what I was talking about to some extent. But he made me feel as if, oh, you're just making mistakes, it's your fault. It was the first time in my life that I started to doubt my own ability as to, do I really know what I'm doing?
You also mentioned in your statement that at various points you requested extra training. Is that right?
I asked that area manager could have some extra training. He agreed to that. He'd said since we'd initially been trained, there'd been some new transactions added to the system, and that might be where the mistakes are occurring. So he said he would try to get me a new trainer. A trainer did come along. He was supposed to be with me for three days, from the Monday to the Wednesday. On the first day, about 4 o'clock, he received a phone call. And he said, sorry, I've got to leave. I've got to go to another post office who've got more pressing needs than what you have. You seem to be okay, but I'll come back and continue the training. So again, but he never ever returned.
How helpful was that training that you received then?
absolutely useless. He just basically stood behind me and watched what I was doing and said, "You seem to be okay." Didn't look at anything, didn't offer any advice, wasn't interested in the problems we've been having. He was just watching to see whether I was carrying out the transaction correctly.
Did you raise that again with your area manager?
Yes, for a long time we carried on about the fact that we hadn't had the training that we were promised. The shortages were still continuing. We were putting them in. Whereas with the first area, you don't see an area manager anymore. It must have been nearly 12 months after the rise and after the first area manager came in that the second one then turned up, and he was a different kettle of fish altogether.
I'm sorry, so that I've understood this, the very first area manager, a lady, was pre-Horizon. Then you had what I'll call a second area manager, who was business-like, and now you're talking about a third area manager.
One, yes.
Yeah, fine.
A third different one.
And what were you told by your last area manager?
He was abrupt, offensive, aggressive from the first minute he walked in, disparaging of what I had to say to him. He would be saying things like, maybe the modern post office is not for you. Have you thought of any other options? Have you thought of taking the rural post office scheme, which was a scheme where they were closing down rural post offices and giving the postmasters a pittance of compensation for closing the office? That you needed to get to grips with the system. He said it appears that you don't have sufficient knowledge of data input. At that time, I explained to him briefly about my time at Sony, where data input was vital. He asked me how long ago was that. I said about 15 years ago. And again, in a disparaging way, so an awful lot's happened in the last 15 years. Things have changed with data input. And that's when I said to him, things have changed. I said, but in terms of data input, they've changed and made things simpler and easier than what they are. Data input is not harder now. The big changes is in the hardware, in the system itself. And I took him on a journey through my time with Sony about the stock taking procedures that we had in Sony, which were vital to Sony. And to show him, we built 2,000 televisions a day. In each television, there was 3,000 components. That's 5-6 million components a day going through the factory. Sony in them days were the first company to introduce what was called the JIT system, just in time, where you didn't have a warehouse, you didn't stock your components. Your suppliers sent in your components the night before you needed them for the next day's production. So at the end of each day, each operator had to count from their workstation what components they had, put it on a form that would be given to the supervisor. The supervisor would hand all the forms to the manager. That would be inputted into the system, electronically sent to the suppliers. They would send in overnight all the components we needed for the next day's production. If we got them stock checks wrong and not enough components came in, then the next day we couldn't produce the number of TVs we were targeted to produce. And we ended up with, as there wasn't that then, 3,000 employees reporting to me would be sitting idle, which is expensive. So it was vital that we got daily, weekly, monthly stock checks and the annual audits correct. It was something that it was bred into me for years. So I knew about data input and I knew about the production of circuit boards, which is where I was trying to explain to him. I thought the problem lay and why it was there. I don't really want interest, but I then explained to him how circuit boards were manufactured and why there might be possibilities of problems with the circuit boards. The fact that when circuit boards are produced, come as a bare board, just a piece of plastic, and the components are fitted to the board through little holes in the board. There's two means of production. One is what they call auto insert, which is basically a robot. The robot fits the components. If it goes wrong, that's the easiest one to sort out, because if a robot goes wrong, it goes wrong on every board. And so you've got a fault on every set. But then the boards go from there to the production lines where the operators insert certain components. And that's where you can have a problem if an operator inserts a component reversed, or when pushing it through the hole, bends a leg, and you don't get a good contact. You can then have a fault on the unit. And quite often what happens is it's not a fault that shows up straight away. The computer monitor or the TV can work perfectly well, but then will break down later. It sometimes doesn't break down till you go out to the customer. And when the customer reports a fault, the first thing we do is we don't send an obnoxious manager out to them and say, this is your fault, you're a simpleton, you don't know how to use an expensive piece of television equipment, maybe you should get a simpler one. We take the television away, we repair it, we feed the fault back to the factory. Things were put in process to make sure it doesn't happen again. A replacement television given to the customer, an apology. We quite often give them some financial compensation, or we give them a present of a small Sony unit, a Walkman, Discman, to say sorry. It's a completely different way they treated us when they thought there was a fault. Because they were just telling me, I thought it had to be something like that because they were telling me it was only me. So I didn't think it was a software problem. I thought somewhere along the line a mistake had been made in the manufacture of computers, because I'd used to manufacture them, and computer monitor manufacturers are done on what we call short production runs. Whereas we're producing 2,000 TVs a day, we would only produce 500 computer monitors a month, and they'd be done on short runs, so less experienced. So I knew that there was a possibility, if it was only me, which is what I thought, that some operator had made a mistake, component hadn't been put in, and it was causing a problem. This was sort of re-emphasised when an engineer turned up to change the board. I thought, at last, they found the problem. So he changed the board, went away, it continued. And about a month later, another engineer came out to change the board again. I asked him then, well, what do you think the problem is? And he said, well, I have no idea, I'm not an engineer, I was just told to come out and change the board. But at that stage, all the time there's sort of light at the end of the tunnel. It's been sorted. But it wasn't. We left on not good terms with that area manager. He just wasn't interested. And I said, look, I just can't continue to make good these losses. It's too much now. We're borrowing money to make good. We're taking from the shop to make good. We just can't continue with this. He just left with more of a threat this time. If you don't continue to make good, then the post office will not have no other alternative but to take legal action against you to recover the losses. It's in your contract. Just make sure you continue to make good the losses.
How did you feel when he said that to you?
I felt gobsmacked. I'd never been spoken to like that by anybody. I had my own ability questioned. I was in a bit of a state, to be honest. I wasn't in the best of moods with him, and I think he was in the best of moods with me by the time that he left. And I felt drained. I thought, I'm just knocking my head against a brick wall here. I know I'm not making mistakes, not to this extent. I know mistakes have been made in the past. I know the post office have made mistakes in the past. I knew the software could make mistakes in a new system, but not the way it was continuing week after week after week.
You also mentioned in your statement that there were auditors that came to your branch, and I think you say they found a discrepancy of £100.
It was just under 100. It was when they came out. It was shortly after the manager had left, a few weeks, and I was convinced he'd sent the auditors out because I'd said I couldn't afford to carry on, and that he thought I hadn't been making good, or if not that he was using this as a way to frighten me. So I know I was getting a bit by this stage edgy, and I thought that's why these have come out. They've come out to try and showed that I'm short. They came, they were a nice enough chap. They told me I couldn't stay in the office. I wanted to stay with them to see what they're doing, because I was hoping they were, again, we'd been in the office by this time we'd never had an audit. It's the first audit that had turned up. And I thought they were hopefully going to sort out the problem. I think they were nice enough. They went through. I couldn't be in the office with them. At the end, it was short by less than, I think it was something like 80 or 90 pounds. It was short. They said I had to put it right. And I said, yeah, that's no problem. I put it right there and then in front of them. And they went away.
How much do you think you put into the post office over your period of time as a sub-postmaster?
It's at least £20,000. It's in the region of £20,000 over that period of time. But the worst part of it wasn't until the end of the second financial year, because it started around about the February, March of 2002. Financial year finished in April. The next financial year, I suddenly realised not only am I putting all this money in from the shop, but I'm also declaring to the tax people and the VAT that I'm taking this money and they're charging me VAT and tax on money that I'm giving to the post office. I haven't even got that money. It was a ridiculous situation. I think that's what brought on the depression that I suffered. At that time, we decided we're selling up. We're not going to continue. After the auditors, we said, we're going to look at selling.
And how did you feel about selling your business at the time and resigning from the post office?
It was mixed, because I was getting into a bit of a stage. That was the beginning of the depression I went into from there. And I was beginning to get into a bit of a stage, and I thought, this is not fair. I'm 55 years of age, I was being 54 then. I'm fit, I'm active, I've got a good CV, I've done I didn't see a problem in finding another position, and I just thought it wasn't worth the hassle and the cost it was giving us. And I was fairly confident at that time that I would get another position.
I'm going to ask you a few questions now about the impact that this has had on you. You've already mentioned making good the shortfalls. How easily did you find another job?
Didn't. Well, I'm going to say that's where my health came in. I started suffering from depression after that auditor came along. My wife, for a long time, was trying to convince me to go and see the GP. I just ignored it. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not going to see GP. And that went on for quite a while until my oldest daughter came in, and she sat me down and explained to me the way I'd been behaving, and convinced me to go and see the GP. And that was beginning in 2004. Went to see the GP. When I seen the GP, he was shocked. He'd seen me 6 months earlier, and we got on very well, me and the GP. We were both football fanatics. We supported rival clubs, and we had a good chat about it. He knew at 50 odd years of age I was still playing football, the local football team. And when I walked in, I'd lost a lot of weight. I hadn't been sleeping, I hadn't been eating. And he diagnosed anxiety, depression. I've got the doctor's notes there where he actually states I suffered from anxiety and depression due to the problems in the post office. He then prescribed antidepressants for me, advised that I take a couple of weeks off work. I told him I couldn't afford to do that, but suffering from the depression the last few months, I've been taking several days off work when I couldn't cope, and having to bring in a Subpostmaster to take over from me, which is very expensive. I couldn't continue doing that. If I took 2 weeks off work, I'd have to again bring in a Subpostmaster. I couldn't do it. And so, and then as my wife had to give up, well, my wife took extended leave to begin with to come into the post office. She looked after the quiet days, and she worked with a Subpostmaster, a substitute postmaster, on the busy Monday when pensions came in, and on the balance day. So we sort of were getting through it, but then I was diagnosed with cancer in mid-2004. If we hadn't been having all the financial problems for the past 18 months, it wouldn't have been a problem. They told me I would go into the operation within the next 2 weeks, and it was 6 to 8 weeks recuperation that I had to completely bed rest. without all the problems previously, we would have just brought in a substitute postmaster to run it. But we couldn't afford that. So I say the wife then took more time off work. She was helping the sub-postmaster get through, but I made the big mistake then, because we couldn't afford it, I rushed back to work within 2 weeks against the doctor's orders, and I ended up with an incisional hernia. It had burst open. They told me that would be a waiting list for that, maybe 5-6 months for that to be repaired. I wasn't able to work in that time, so my wife then had to give up her job completely to run the post office, and I sat in the post office to advise her with the tricky, which was just making the depression worse. I'd had to give up all the positions I had in the community. I was chairman of the community council, I was a trustee of Glenarran Drop-In Centre, I was a trustee of the welfare hall, I was chairman of the football club, chairman of the community centre. I'd given all them up, not realising that was isolating yourself even further and making the depression worse. And that's when we decided we've got to sell it quick. And we got somebody in quickly. Luckily we were able to sell the post office. By then the depression was bad, only for the family. I didn't in the right state. It continued for about 2 years after we left the post office. I was in a bad state. And the idea of 12 months before we left that I was in a good position, I could easily get another senior position somewhere. Here I am, being depressed for 2 years, but a large inoperable hernia. Had gone through 3 bouts of surgery by then, and then they said they couldn't repair it. I was stuck with this inoperable hernia for life. So I had an inoperable hernia. I'd had 2 years of depression. There was no chance of getting a job. I'm now nearly 59 years of age with a 2-year gap in my CZ, and publicity started about what had happened with post officers, and tried to explain why I left the post office. So at that stage, 59, I'd just given up on it.
What impact did your trouble with the post office have on your relationship with your wife?
For a long time, I didn't know. As I say, during the last few months in the post office and a couple of years afterwards, I was in a bad way. I became a recluse. I didn't want to come out of my bedroom. It was later on that my children told me how badly I'd been behaving. I'd become a bit of a bully. My wife was taking the brunt of all of that at the time. They'd seen me go from being a sociable, outgoing, fit, responsible person into a bully, to someone who had never borrowed money in his life, never had HP, high purchase, never had a credit card, to suddenly borrowing money from his children, to find myself in that sort of state. Before Horizon, we'd been financially secure. We went on regular long-haul holidays. We went to Hawaii, Mexico, Cuba, Egypt. On 2 occasions, we were able to take the whole family to Florida to visit Disneyland. I was able to do that with my 3 now adult grandchildren. Never been able to do that with my 3 young school-age grandchildren. We haven't had a decent holiday for the past 20 years. Our life just collapsed from there.
What about your daughter who was going to take over the post office?
Obviously, she was. It wasn't imminent there and then, so it wasn't a disaster for her. It was something she was looking forward to, something she'd been saving for, something that she wanted to do. She wasn't too happy in her position at that time. She worked in the civil service, patient service, and they were going through privatisation. So she wasn't too happy with what was possible. She was looking forward to this, but she got over it. She's still there. She's still working.
You also mentioned briefly your reputation in the community. What impact did this have on that?
That was mixed. When we first left post office. We'd sold the post office to another chap, and there was a nice article in the parish magazine going through all that we'd done for the community over the years and why I was leaving, and everything was hunky-dory. But then about 3 months after, the sub-postmaster sold up, got out. He didn't want to know. The post office was moved to the convenience store over the road, and that's when rumours started to circulate then. The majority of people were fantastic, but as usual, the minority are the most vociferous and the ones that cause the most trouble. And things were being said that, we had been involved in something had gone on in the post office and we'd been sacked. It wasn't the fact that because I was suffering from depression, I'd sort of gone out of sight. I hadn't been seen in the area for months and was sort of putting 2 and 2 together, making 5. I'm ashamed to be seen in the area. They were just, I don't know how to really put it. It became so that my wife again was taking the brunt of it. I didn't know nothing about this for years afterwards. Not only was she putting up with me, she was putting up with some of the residents. And she didn't want to go explaining to them what my health issues were to strangers, explaining why we'd left the post office. So she was taking the brunt of all that. I mean, all of a sudden to these people, all that I'd done in the community, I mean, just before I'd left, I'd raised nearly £100,000 to refurbish, on my own, to refurbish the welfare hall that was in a dilapidated state. And all of a sudden that's all forgotten. We just wanted to talk about the fact that I'd been sacked from the post office. But as I say, at that time, I didn't know nothing about it. So it just went on. I presume there's still, all the vast majority of them knew me. I'm certain there's still some out there that still believe something went on, particularly during the years when the publicity was around postmasters being prosecuted and things like that. It just generated itself.
What would you like from the post office now?
In the post office, I know a lot of people have said a lot of things, so I'll just keep it quite simple. I got mixed feelings on this, I've got to be honest. I wouldn't like to see any more people going to prison. It would be more innocent people, not them, their partners, their children being affected. I don't want to see any more innocent people affected by this. But what I would like to see is the people at the top of the tree. They always build a firewall around themselves. No real action ever gets taken against them. But what I'd like to see is the publicity where they would be publicly humiliated, so much so that they wouldn't be able to get another senior position anywhere else, and that the media could make sure that that happens, that they get shunned by society as some of us were shunned by society. People don't want to know them. People further down the line, I'd like to see them explain on oath all that they were involved in. They must have known, even the people on the helpline, they were telling me I was the only one. They must have been getting phone calls from hundreds of postmasters on the same topic, and still they were telling you were the only one. I'd like to see them on oath explain all that they were involved in, who instructed them to behave in that way that they did, and why, when they had become aware of the situation, as they obviously had, they continued to knowingly pursue innocent people. I would like to see all NDOs, the non-disclosure orders, lifted so we can finally get transparency and people can freely tell what they know. I'd like to see some form of asset recovery order in order to recoup all the bonuses that these senior executives were paid. The profits the post office made were made on the back of people like me and others. They shouldn't still have that money. And finally, please pay the 555, the legal expenses that were incurred. It's dragging on. You've said it should be done. You know it can be done. You've got the best legal minds in the country. You've proved that in the past when you chased us. So you shouldn't be too difficult in being able to release. I know you're saying it's full and final payment, but that was done on the basis of you were dealing with us in good faith, which has been proved that you weren't. So that full and final settlement should be set aside.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to the chair?
I'd like to make a personal statement if Sylwyn is happy for me to do that.
Yes, of course.
In simple terms, the post office managed to destroy in 2 years all that I'd strived to achieve in the previous 40 years. My reputation, financial security, mental health, well-being, nearly destroyed my marriage and family life. It was only my family that's seen me through that dark period. Just for a little background, I'm one of 10 brothers and sisters. I had to leave school at 15 with no qualifications in order to financially contribute to the family. Years later, at the age of 25, with my wife's support, I returned to full-time education. At that time, we had preschool twins, and Kathy returned to work full-time to support this. After I was employed at Sony UK as a supervisor, over the years, I worked hard and continued my education of an evening after work at Bridgend College, gaining my degree from the Institute of Business Managers, and then worked my management structure to become the senior production manager, with a workforce of some 3,000 reporting to me, with a management team of 20 managers and 45 supervisors. Later, I became self-employed, and in 1998, we bought Printer Post Office, and as I thought, settled down to see out our work and life in a lovely rural village. At this time, I've become actively involved in the community activities, chair of Lanarn Community Council, trustee of Lanarn Community Development Trust, trustee of Lanarn Welfare Hall, chair of the village football club, governor of the local primary school. All of this was ripped away from me by a dishonest management team who couldn't find it within their conscience to admit their mistakes, and instead ruined the lives of hundreds of hard-working people such as myself. I also believe that they are responsible for my now physical health, in that due to the financial system I found myself in at that time with my kidney cancer diagnosis and surgery, I returned to work earlier than I was directed, as I could not afford to continue employing the substitute postmaster at great cost further, which resulted in suffering serious seasonal hernia requiring further surgery, which was unsuccessful. Then a third one, which again was unsuccessful, resulting in the consultant determining that there was no possibility of rectifying the situation. Now I'm left with a large inoperable hernia on my right side. But to some extent, I feel myself lucky in deciding to sell my office when I did. I was listening to others, some of whom suffered similar small losses as I did, and then out of the blue, a massive loss. I think this was waiting around the corner for me, an amount that we would not have been able to pay. I don't know what would have happened if that had occurred. At the conclusion of this inquiry, I'm just hopeful that the publicity, setting the blame where it belongs, squarely at the feet of the post office management, will finally reinstate my reputation and others in our communities and vindicate what I've always said. I would like to express my thanks to Alan Bates and his team for the phenomenal amount of work that they've devoted to this. When Mrs. Vanells is finally stripped of her awards, if you politicians wish to make amends, I would suggest you look no further when it comes from the nominations for this group, who gave us all hearts through all of the heartache. And finally, thanks to you, Sylwyn, for giving us the opportunity to publicly lift this weight off our shoulders.
Well, the thanks actually, Mr. Beaumont, are due to you for coming to speak to me. So thanks very much.
Here's it.
Right. We have another live witness, yes?
Yes, that's right.
Do we need a short break before that happens?
Yes,
I can see a few nods in the room. So around about 11:30?
Thank you.
Fine. Ms. Hodge.
Thank you, sir. Our next witness is Mr. Christian Clement.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth.
whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Mr. Clement, as you know, my name is Catriona Hodge,
Yeah.
and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry.
Okay.
Please can you state your full name?
Christian Clement.
You made a statement on the 8th of February of this year, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Do you have a copy of your statement in front of you?
I do.
Please could you turn to the final page of that statement at page 10?
Yeah,
Can you see your signature at the bottom of that page?
I do, yeah.
Have you had an opportunity to reread your statement since it was made?
I have, and I'd like to make some amendments if I could.
Please.
Paragraph 2, just change the date to December 2017.
So this is at paragraph 2.
Yeah.
Are we talking about the first date or the second date,
The
please?
second date, October the
October-
15th to December 2017.
Thank you.
And paragraph 27 as well, please.
Yes, thank you.
When I said I went into the residential premises, I want to change it to went to the retail side of the premises.
That's fine. Are there any further changes?
47, paragraph 47. Just say that I wasn't hit over the head on this occasion, but I was threatened with a gun, and then I hit the silent alarm.
So in the first paragraph, when you said I was hit over the head,
Yeah,
you said it was a threat with a gun.
threat with a gun, and then I hit the silent alarm.
Okay, thank you.
And then 49, just one word. On this occasion, I was threatened, not assaulted.
Thank you. Apart from those corrections, is the statement otherwise true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is, yes.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by asking a few questions about you.
Okay.
How old are you, Mr. Clement?
46.
Where did you grow up?
In Manselton, Swansea.
And what did you do on leaving school?
I did computer studies in college, and then I went on to do trainee butchery in Roy's Cook Meats. And I went in to help my father in a post office and general store.
When did you first become involved in running a post office branch?
Not running, I worked in a post office branch with my father because he had a post office in his premises. And that's where I learned to front a house when you just serve customers and just do the general.
Do you recall when you started helping him?
I think it was 1998.
And you've explained that he employed you, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And what was your role?
Just mainly to do the shop side of things, just do the buying and selling from the warehouse and bringing stock there, and occasionally help out in the post office on the counter.
Where was that post office located?
In Tratline.
For how long did you assist your father in the branch?
For almost 14 years.
Why did you later decide to apply to become a sub-postmaster?
Well, after my father sold the business, I started doing relief work and going on other offices, covering them for holidays and whatever. And I had a position in Manselton where they wanted holiday cover. So I went there and they told me then that they were looking to sell. So I looked into it and I thought it was a good prospect, so I thought I'd buy it.
When did you purchase it?
I think it was December 2007.
This was the branch in Manselton?
It was, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just intrigued. It's not something that's vital to the inquiry.
Yeah.
But we heard from Mr. Kelly yesterday,
Yeah.
and Mr. Kelly told us that he'd also been a sub-postmaster, I believe, in Manselton.
Yeah.
And that's the Brondig post office. So that was something...
No, that was round the corner. I was Robert Street.
Precisely. So, but there was more than one post
Yes,
office
yeah.
in Manselton.
Yeah, there was, yeah.
I believe. Fine. Thanks. Yeah.
Which products and services did you provide from the branch?
All pensions, gyros, lottery, just all the general post office things.
And you've mentioned already there was a retail side to the business. Is that
It was, yeah. We had the lottery terminal and we just had general cards, confectionery, some drinks, stationery.
Where did you live whilst you were running the post office branch?
I lived behind, upstairs in the flat,
So there was some residential...
attached to the post office, yeah.
How much did you pay to purchase the business?
It was about 220,000, I think.
And did that cover the goodwill of the business?
Yeah, I had to take out a remortgage on my other house to purchase the premises.
But were you purchasing a freehold?
Yes,
the
it was. Yeah,
property?
yeah.
How much money did you put into renovating the premises?
About 10,500.
And how much income did you receive from the post office for running the branch?
45,000 a year.
When was Horizon first installed in your father's branch?
Oh, 1997, 98, I think.
And
Not 100%, but I think it was around there.
And then what training did you receive when it was first installed?
We had, about half a day's training at Aberafon Beach Hotel. We went there and we were just shown the front of office and how to basically serve customers, but nothing in the back office to do with accounts and how do you balance or any of that. I picked that up slowly as I went along.
Who provided the training to you at the hotel?
The post office.
What was your impression of the adequacy of the training you received?
It wasn't adequate. There's a lot of gaps. I picked up as I went along. As I was working alongside other people, I picked their brains on how to do things and how to move forward and things I wasn't sure of. But as for the training, no, it just wasn't long enough. I think we needed a lot more training.
Did you feel confident using the system after you'd received that training?
Not really, no. Not for a while until I picked other people's brains.
Did you receive any further training when you were appointed a Subpostmaster?
No, we had somebody there for the changeover, and that was about it. They just checked everything, all the accounts and all the cash, and then they just swapped us over. I had a number of an auditor who came to do my father's office when he swapped over, and I took his number. So anything I wasn't sure of, I'd ring him to pick his brains to help me if I wasn't sure of what I was doing.
Did you experience problems using the Horizon system when you were working in your father's branch?
My father started to have losses, but he wasn't too sure. He thought it might have been staff, so he was installing cameras and everything else, but he was having losses, but not to the degree I was having.
What did you do when shortfalls or discrepancies arose?
You have to put it back in the till.
Did you make any efforts to identify the cause of
Yeah, we
shortfalls?
phoned the helpline. I had a number for Chesterfield. You'd ring them up to try and find out if there's anything looks out of place, and just trying to trace down what, if there's anything stand out. But they'd always just say, no, nothing, everything's fine. If there is a mistake and we find it, we'll send you a transaction correction, and you can just accept it and it'll balance the books. So, but no.
Is that what would happen, that you'd receive a transaction?
I never had a transaction correction. It was always only one way, always losing money.
When you were employed as a Subpostmaster, how often were you calling the helpline for assistance?
Several times a week.
You've explained that you were told to put the cash in and
Yeah.
you would receive a transaction correction to balance out later,
Yeah.
and that didn't occur.
No.
How would you describe the quality of the assistance you received from the helpline?
Poor, very poor. It's just as you phone them and give them the problem, you seem to know more than they did, because it just seemed as if they were reading off a script. They may as well have told me to switch the computer off and switch it back on, it'll all be sorted. But no, it just wasn't very helpful, always passing you from pillar to post, and you never really got anywhere, and just frustration.
You've identified in your statement a number of shortfalls
Yes.
that you experienced. They're recorded at paragraphs 17 to 25
Yeah.
of your statement. I'd just like to ask you a few questions
Yeah.
about those, if I may. Some of these shortfalls date back more than a decade.
Yeah.
What records did you keep of the
Everything was in
amounts?
my bank statements. Everything that I paid out would come out of my pay. So I've got all my pay slips with the deductions for the losses, this is how we broke down all this to my accountant. We had my accountant to go through and break down all the losses over the decade, and that's why we came up with a figure of what we put in over 10 years.
So you've explained you were told to pay money in.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
We'd have to settle centrally. It's the only way, because I didn't have the cash, that kind of cash, to pay up front. We just press a button to settle centrally, and it'd go off to head office, and then they'd deduct it out of your salary then.
Okay. So in virtually every case, deductions were being made from your salary.
From my salary, yeah.
And you could record that on your payslip.
Yes.
That would be reflected on
Yeah.
payslips. In terms of the figures you've recorded there in your statements at paragraph 17 onwards, do these reflect individual shortfalls that you experienced, or are they an aggregate of a number?
Yeah, individual shortfalls monthly. Yearly.
How were these shortfalls discovered?
Well, basically, we do a cash variance every day, declare our cash every day. It would be up or down a couple of pounds, nothing big. But whenever we come to the main balance, the monthly balance, it would always kick out crazy figures. Like one time it would be £800, and then another time it's £2,500, and £5,500. And you dig out the safe, you pull out all the stamps, you triple check everything to see if you've done a mistake, you've added up something wrong. You've checked what you've remmed in from outside, as in cash and stamps, to see if you've made a mistake. But nothing. Everything seemed to be above board, so we could never... That was the big thing. You could never tell them where it was. It was just you didn't know. And as crazy as that sounds, you just didn't know. You don't know why you're down. So it was just so frustrating.
You've explained you phoned the helpline on a number of occasions, several times per week, you've said.
Yeah.
Did you formally raise a dispute with the helpline about these shortfalls you've recorded?
Yeah, I spoke to my contracts manager to tell him there's something not right. We even had a meeting, and I went there and asked him if I was the only person this was happening to. And he said, yes, you're the only person this is happening to, because I couldn't understand how we kept on losing this money all the time. And it makes you doubt then whether or not you're doing your job properly. And even to the doubt where you're blaming the staff that's working with you. Like my sister was working, and I'm thinking, is she making mistakes? And my ex-brother-in-law, he was on the lottery system. There's fingers point that it could be the scratch cards, which he was on. So I'm looking at him thinking, is he taking money? So it just cast doubt on everybody that was working with you. It was awful.
You've just explained you raised concerns with your contract manager at the time.
Yeah.
Who was that?
Colin Burston.
How much in total do you believe you paid to the post office to make good shortfalls shown by Horizon?
Over a 10-year period, about 80,000, 88,000.
What effect did this have upon your finances?
Huge effect. Huge effect. I think it was one of the main factors with the pressure of constantly being down and losing money. I've had to rent my house out, move in with my parents. I think it cost my relationship for 17 years. Because we're always arguing over money and the stresses and strains of everything. Just in a bad place. Depression, drinking, bad anxiety. Yes, every day when you're getting up for work, you think, is this the last day I'm going to work? Are the other auditors going to be outside and you're just waiting for the axe to drop? It's a horrible feeling.
You've mentioned audits. You've explained in your statement that your branch was audited each year.
Yeah, most years we'd have an audit, yeah.
Between the date of your appointment and when you ultimately, your contract was terminated.
Yeah.
Correct. And you've explained that on each occasion a shortfall was discovered, is that
Yes.
right? Were the shortfalls discovered during the audit additional to the ones that you've recorded earlier in your statement?
There has been shortfalls with the audit, but as long as it was under £1,000, I was told we could reopen. And we did. There was a few occasions we were £800 down and we still were allowed to reopen and to settle it centrally. It was just, most times the auditors came there, we were always down by something. It was always a couple of £100.
So can I understand this, Mr. Clement? If we just go back to paragraphs 17 onwards or 16 onwards, where you describe the shortfalls.
Yeah.
Over the years, the shortfalls reached very high amounts.
Yeah.
Right? But so that I understand it, what was happening was this, is it? You would see that there was a shortfall.
Yeah.
You would settle it centrally.
Yeah.
Once you discovered what it was.
Yeah.
So that all these deductions were coming out of your will.
That's right, yeah.
So that by the time of an audit, the shortfall was comparatively small because you kept paying it back.
Yeah, because it's already come out of my account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were like two parallel lines. You
Yes.
keep paying it back.
Yeah.
So that on
You're paying
audit
this one
time-
back, and then this one's coming in.
Yeah, fine. I'm with you.
Yeah. It's,
Yeah, fine. Sorry, Miss.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. You've explained that an audit of your branch took place in May 2007.
That's right,
Sorry,
yeah.
2017. Apologise.
yeah.
And that audit revealed an apparent shortfall of approximately £6,000.
Yeah.
And you've said, again, on that occasion, you were required to pay that money by
Pay
way
it
of
back.
deduction from your salary.
Went in to see my contracts manager again, went through the same old scenario, and he said, this is my last chance. If any other shortfalls after this, you'd be terminated. So,
So far as you are aware, did the Post Office carry out any investigation into the cause of this shortfall when you raised your concerns with your contracts manager?
I've asked them to, but nothing ever came back to me. No phone calls were ever made to me or any paraphernalia coming to me to say that they were looking into things. It was just a phone call I never had. I'd be on to my contracts manager, chasing him up to see if there's anything happening, and no, nothing. Just put the money in. Just put the money in.
Was that the final audit of your branch in May 2017?
No, the final order was December 2017. That's when we had the massive loss and I got suspended on the spot.
What was the amount of the apparent shortfall on that?
About
occasion?
43,000.
And what action was taken by the Post Office as a result of that shortfall?
Suspended me on the spot pending an investigation. Took the keys off me and told me they'd be in touch.
You've mentioned that you were suspended previously from your role.
I was.
In October 2011, is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's right, yeah.
For a period of 3 months.
Yes.
You've explained this was the result of an audit which revealed an apparent shortfall of £2,000.
That's right, yeah.
What effect did the suspension have on your salary?
Oh, the salary stopped. I had no income at all. They put some temporary staff into my post office and I moved in with my parents until, well, just praying I got my job back, and thank God I did.
You said you did get your job back. How did that come about?
I had another interview with Colin Burston, explained to him that I didn't hide everything. Everything was declared. I even spoke to him to say that there's a problem. Put everything through the system as it was to show that there was a shortfall. And just to reiterate that there was nothing underhanded going on. I've declared everything as it was. So I wasn't hiding anything. And I told you about the shortfall before I was suspended. So...
And forgive me, this is in relation to your first suspension.
Yes, it was, yeah.
When you were later suspended as a result of the audit in December 2017,
Yeah.
how was that resolved?
Well, I was with Freeds at the time, and I told Freeds about what had happened, and they told me not to accept any contact from the post office, and they'll deal with them themselves. But I tried ringing my contracts manager to speak to me, and because I had solicitors involved, he said he couldn't speak to me.
And you say you'd instructed solicitors by this point.
Yes.
Was that part of the group litigation?
Yeah, the group litigation, yeah. I was already in it as I was still a Subpostmaster, because I was still having losses.
And did the Post Office ultimately take any action against you in relation to that shortfall of approximately £43,000?
No, nothing.
You've explained in your statement you experienced 2 robberies of your branch.
Yes.
On the first occasion, you've of course made some corrections.
Yes.
But in the first instance, I think you've explained that you'd left your post office, the post office side of the premises to go into the retail side.
That's
is that
right,
correct?
yeah.
Why had you done that?
At the end of the day, we got the lottery terminal there with all the cash. So every day you empty the cash out, take the print-offs, and they put it through the system in the post office. So I left the post office to go and get the cash and the printouts. And on the way back, I got struck behind on the back of the head and knocked unconscious. But I didn't lock the door of the post office because it's literally from that wall to halfway through the room, from the post office to the lotteries counter. And then I was held accountable for half the money that had gone missing.
What did that amount to?
About, I think it was about 50,000, 46, 50,000.
On the second occasion that your branch was robbed, no money was taken.
No money
is
was
that
taken,
right?
no.
What happened on that occasion?
Two men come in with bike helmets and put a gun up against the glass and told me to give them the money while they tried to jar the door open. So I just fell to the floor and hit the silent alarm. And they just waited for the police to turn up, which they did within about 15 minutes. Yeah, shook up.
Did you report that incident to the post office?
I phoned the helpline, told them. They asked if any money had gone missing. I said no. And they said they'd contact me in due course. And then I had a phone call then just to give me a number if I felt stressed. But after that, I didn't hear anything else. I was just a bit of a kick in the teeth. I was left in limbo. They absolutely didn't care. That's what it felt like. Just a number.
How did your contract with the post office come to an end?
Well, they asked if I had to sell my premises because there was no income. I had to do 2 jobs to try and pay the mortgages. I had to sell my house at a £21,000 loss. And then they asked me if they wanted to be reinstated as a sub-postmaster after all this had gone on. But I said I haven't got a premises to use anymore. So they said, what they say, they'll terminate my contract, and I think they ended up giving me some money to terminate my contract.
So just to break that down a little, you said as a result of no income coming in,
Yeah.
you had to sell the premises.
I did, yeah.
Is that because your income, your salary was stopped when you were suspended in December
was, yeah.
2017?
Yeah.
And without that income, you couldn't afford to pay
No, I couldn't afford the mortgage.
mortgage on the property?
Yeah.
And you sold that property at a loss of £21,000?
I did, yeah.
Is that right? Although you were subsequently asked by the post office if you wished to be reinstated?
Yes.
Before these events occurred, what had been your intentions and your hopes in relation to your post office branch?
Well, a secure future, secure, prosperous future. I thought it'd all be good. I wanted to reiterate what my father had done with his office and build it up into something special, which I was on the way to doing. We were the #1 seller of stamps and stuff in most of South Wales. We won prizes, and I built it up to a good business. And hopefully we were going to go onwards and upwards, but it was never the case. It was just always an uphill struggle.
In terms of the financial impact on you, are you currently in debt?
I am, yes. Yes.
What's the nature of your debts?
I owe 21,000 to the bank. I owe 10,000 to the HMRC. I owe my father about 25,000. So yeah, we're not in a good place.
What efforts have you made to obtain alternative employment?
I'm now doing delivery driving work at the moment, just to try and get ends meet and pay back some of the bills.
You've already described that the financial pressure this created caused you a great deal of stress
Yes.
and anxiety. Is that right?
Yes, it is, yes.
Did you receive any treatment?
I had some anxiety tablets prescribed to me by the doctor. I didn't want the antidepressant ones. But I ended up, just had some anxiety pills and drowned my sorrows in alcohol.
For how long are you continuing to experience?
No, we're on the way out. Still not right. My anxiety levels are terrible, especially in places like this. It's been hard to come here today, but yeah, I'm slowly getting there. I'm just gotta keep at it.
You've also explained it had quite a significant impact on your personal life.
Yes, yeah, it cost me a relationship for 17 years. Just couldn't, she just couldn't carry on with, because what happens is when you're down all the time, you end up taking your problems home, and it's always on your mind, you're always down money, you're always waiting for the axe to drop, and the pressure was just too much. And that was the end of that, unfortunately. But and my children, it's obviously put a lot of stress on them as well, but we just got to try and pick ourselves up and move forward.
Do you still see your children?
Yes, I do.
You've explained you became a claimant in the group litigation.
Yes.
Is that right? How much compensation did you receive when that was settled?
Not enough. Not enough to clear the debts. Just not enough. I still owe loads of money out, and it just didn't really get me on any firm footing at all.
How do you now feel about the treatment that you received from the post office when you experienced these shortfalls?
Disgusting. They didn't help me at all. They left us out in the cold. And you just felt like, there was nobody there to help you. Just felt on your own. And, even though you're phoning around trying to ask for help from every direction and every phone number, nobody. Just put the money in, put the money in, put the money in. So, no.
What do you think the post office needs to do to put right what's happened to you and others in your position?
Make it as if this never happened. I don't know. Give us a secure and prosperous future again if they can do that. But I don't know. Give everyone what they deserve and then some.
I've no further questions for you, Mr. Clement. Is there anything you'd like to say to the chair that we've not already covered?
That's okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and particularly since it was an effort for you to come, which I fully understand, I'm even more grateful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right. I think the next stage is some statement reading. Is that right?
That's right, sir. That concludes our oral evidence for this morning.
This morning, yeah. And I think Mr. Enright is going to read a number of statements. So do you want to have a short break, Mr. Enright, or are you happy to just carry on? Well, then that's fine. So let Mr. Enright take the stage, and then once he's completed his reading, we'll decide on the timetable for the rest of the day, yeah? Thank you.
Thank you.
With your permission, Chair, I'd like to read some summaries. Yesterday, you made it clear that the inquiry and your legal team have the full witness statements of all CP victims. I will now read you some short summaries in relation to Mr. Paul Harry, Helen Walker-Brown, Janice Adams, Lawrence Bailey and Mrs. Pamela Locke. Mr. Harry has been a sub-postmaster at Turbot from 1988 to the present day. He's been a sub-postmaster at 3 other branches. Mr. Harry provided employment for 21 assistants across all 4 branches. Mr. Harry experienced shortfalls on the Horizon system in excess of £100,000 across his post offices over the course of 22 years. The post office deducted 25% of his salary. Paul was threatened with prosecution if he did not pay the supposed shortfalls. The post office audit teams refused to listen to his pleas that they help him and investigated the true cause of the shortfalls, which he told the post office were caused by computer errors. Under threat of legal action, Mr. Harry was compelled to make good these supposed shortfalls from his own funds. He was forced to borrow money from family members and had to sell his family home. Mr. Harry says that he was and remains extremely hurt, frustrated and angry. Mr. Harry and his wife became very anxious and depressed. He says it is diabolical that the government and post office have been able to treat them in the way that they did and get away with it. Mr. Harry says it is clear that nobody in the post office cares about sub-postmasters and how they were treated. In any other private organisation, this would not have happened. It is simply because the post office is a government organisation that they were able to get away with it for so long. At this point, the Post Office should hold their hands up, accept responsibility and say that they will put this right. Mr. Harry, like so many sub-postmasters, concludes, we just want to put our lives back on track and move on. So I now turn to Mrs. Helen Walker-Brown. Helen worked as a teacher for 20 years before becoming a regional education officer and thereafter becoming a sub-postmistress at Penmanoir in April 2017. Ms. Walker-Brown experienced problems with the Horizon system in her first 3 months and experienced numerous shortfalls. Helen found the helpline to be of no assistance. On a number of occasions when she experienced shortfalls, the course of action recommended by the helpline caused the shortfall to double. After a large shortfall, Ms. Walker-Brown felt her position had become untenable and she resigned in April 2018. Ms. Walker-Brown was party to the group litigation against Post Office Limited that uncovered this national scandal. Throughout her time as a postmistress, Helen suffered constant worry and stress caused by shortfalls which rendered her business unviable. This affected her family life. Helen felt that she had let down her local community who relied on her post office. After resigning as a sub-postmistress, Helen would rarely leave the house. When she eventually did, she would use the back alley as she felt unable to face local people. Eventually, she felt she had no option but to leave her village and move to the next county. Helen says, in my view, the government must repay or be required to repay the legal and legal funding costs that sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses incurred to pull back the heavy veil the Post Office had drawn over their Horizon system and their actions against innocent, decent postmasters. Helen says, it cannot be right that ordinary British people must bear the cost of uncovering a national scandal, particularly one of this scale. So I move to Janice Adams. Ms. Adams was the sub-postmistress in Pontypridd from June 2000 until May 2014. She'd worked at the Inland Revenue for 24 years prior to this. She was and is a meticulous person. Ms. Adams states that the Horizon training was pathetic and laughable. She suffered shortfalls of some £5,000, which the Post Office deducted from her salary. Janice says that Post Office auditors were intrusive and unfriendly. They acted in a manner which made it clear to her customers that she was being investigated. Ms. Adams says that when she reported the discrepancies to the Post Office, they told her it was down to her lack of experience. They made her feel like she was stupid and incompetent, even though she knew that this was not the case. She would cry every Wednesday night as she struggled to balance the Horizon system. Ms. Adams suffered from migraines due to stress, and the shortfalls caused her to struggle financially. As a result of the issues with the Horizon system, she spent less time at home with her 3 young children. Her family was not able to go on holidays as they were so short of money. Janice says, I try to get on with my life and not think about the Post Office, but I think a lot of sub-postmasters are struggling. I want to help others and for the public to know all about the Horizon scandal so something can happen for these people who need it. I would like those responsible to be held to account. Janice says, the people who knew and hid the problems with the Horizon definitely have to be held to account. So I move to Mr. Lawrence Bailey. Lawrence is the husband of Joan Bailey, who gave evidence to you on the 22nd of February, sir. I will not repeat the powerful evidence that Ms. Bailey gave you regarding her and Lawrence's experiences of the Horizon system and the conduct of the Post Office. However, although Mr. Bailey shared Joan's experience, this scandal also affected him personally. Not only did Lawrence help run the main branch, he also travelled 80 miles twice a week to provide post office outreach services to smaller communities. The village halls where he did this were sometimes so cold that he would do exercises to stay warm. However, Lawrence thought it was important that those in isolated communities have access to post office services. Lawrence says of the treatment he received from the post office that it has and still does cause me great distress. It brought me to the lowest part of my life. I had gone through some dreadful times, but I had always come out on top. I had never known fear. I considered myself to be capable of looking after myself with my knowledge of martial arts and having always been an active and strong person in body and mind. However, the post office's actions caused me to question my own sanity, and I was in great despair and considered taking my own life. My wife and son took me to the GP, and I was given immediate access to a mental health professional and was classed as having suffered a mental breakdown and was considered to be at serious risk of self-harm. Mr. Lawrence Bailey says of the post office that their duty of care was non-existent. And finally, sir, I would like to turn to Mrs. Pamela Locke. Pamela Locke became a sub-postmistress in Powys in 1974. She is now sadly widowed. She has 2 children and 6 grandchildren. She is 73. Together with her late husband, she ran a successful bakery business alongside a busy post office for 26 years before the introduction of the Horizon system. During those 26 years, she experienced no problems with shortfalls, none. The Horizon system was introduced in early 2000, and by July 2000, her post office Horizon system was reporting a shortfall of over £30,000. Rather than investigate the cause of the shortfalls experienced by this long-serving postmaster, the post office prosecuted Mrs. Locke. She appeared in the Magistrates' Court in November 2001. Her case was then sent to the Crown Court. On advice, she pleaded guilty. She and her daughter stood weeping in the court. Her husband was silent. Mrs. Locke says of her husband, he said little, but felt much. Mrs. Locke waited 20 years to have her conviction quashed and to regain her good name. The personal and financial impact on Mrs. and Mr. Locke was immense. Mrs. Locke's conviction was splashed across the South Wales Evening Post. People she had known for years shunned her. Mrs. Locke and her husband had to sell a part of their retail business to pay back the shortfalls. They struggled to keep their retail business going as they had lost footfall with the loss of the post office, and her name had been trashed in the local community. Eventually, they had to sell their business for a pittance. These terrible experiences continued for 20 years. Mrs. Locke lost everything, including her reputation. She has said, I would like the post office to pay for a front page headline in the South Wales Evening Post showing a picture of me then and now with the headline, Pamela Locke was innocent, post office apologises. Dinner wit. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Enright. While I've got you here, so to speak, I think the witness this afternoon is a person...
An anonymous witness, sir.
Exactly so. I've made a restriction order in this witness's case. And the witness is scheduled, I take it, for 2 o'clock. But given that we're now 12:15, we're either going to have an elongated lunchtime, or is there the possibility that the witness will be ready to give evidence a little earlier than 2?
I am hoping he may already be in the building, sir, and I can speak to him and liaise with you very quickly.
Yeah, and no doubt you will tell everybody else so that everybody who is interested in hearing that evidence will know when it's happening. Thank you very much, Mr. Enright. So I'll wait to be kept appraised of when we meet again. Thank you.